What's up, guys? This is Theo coming in with my little presentation on ethical realism. Let's make this smaller. Yeah. As you might hear, I'm from Switzerland, so please bear with my terrible Swiss-German accent. I had to translate all of this, and I will totally butcher some of these words. I'm often in the audience in many atheists, humanists YouTube channels. I'm always primarily interested in the friendship aspect and finding like-minded, reasonable people, and the education and spreading of secular humanism on these channels. I'm not so much interested in any religious mythology or impractical arguments for God discussions, but very much in discussing where we get fairness and justice from. I won't argue over personal opinion and taste with you, but about objective ethics. These ethics I'm presenting today are of course not my invention, but the combination and result of many thinkers in the spirit of the Enlightenment and secular humanism. It's modern secular natural law theory. It serves both believers of all kinds and atheists alike. I do this to address a big problem I see. We are constantly told that morality is just a matter of perspective, cultural consensus, or subjective feeling, and that there are no objective ethics. I'm here to demonstrate why that's wrong and problematic, and to present the modern empirical evolution of the natural rights tradition. Stripped off the old religious metaphysics, only looking at the hard facts. Ethics is not a social construct, but a structural necessity based on what we are as human beings. Before we dive deep into it, many people might ask, isn't this just impractical philosophical masturbation? And why they should care at all about meta-ethics while the world is burning? A legit question, but this is what we're talking about and why it matters. A classic Fox News line. The left is actively trying to rearrange our politics, our culture, our courts and our schools to align with their radical woke views on sex, gender and race. If morality is reduced to mere opinion, we lose the rational ground to defend anyone. Human rights become preferences. Equality becomes a preference. Freedom becomes a preference. Tolerance becomes a preference. If your opinion of justice is a minority against the bigot or fascist majority, of course the bigot fascist side with more power wins, you call it a day and fair game then? No. We need a standard that is independent of what anyone happens to believe. And that's exactly the definition of moral realism. Here, ethical realism claims that there exist moral truths, objective ethical principles that are independent of any individual's beliefs, feelings, or preferences. Objective in this context does not mean non-subjective or mind-independent, in the sense of not requiring a mind of a subject to discover it. A brain is definitely required to find ethics. Instead, it means belief-independent. Ethical claims can be true or false regardless of what individuals or cultures happen to think about them. This immediately distinguishes ethical realism from subjectivism or expressivism, where moral claims are reduced to attitudes or emotional expressions. Ethics, in this sense, is not about describing what people believe, but about evaluating whether those beliefs are justified according to non-arbitrary standards. For clarity, as there are these two different layers, I will maintain a distinction between the two. Therefore, variation in morality does not imply absence of objective ethics. It only reflects variation in compliance, understanding, institutional development, and the personal cultural prioritization. I shouldn't have to say it, but those are the most common misconceptions I hear people make about the concept. Ethical realism does not claim or imply that ethical truths should be obvious and fully intuitively accessible to everyone, that moral agreement should exist across cultures or history, that ethical principles should have been always respected in practice, or that moral progress is either automatic or linear. Disagreement is therefore not evidence against objectivity. 2 examples. The existence of flat earthers does not hurt the validity of the fact that our Earth is round. And young Earth creationists' disagreement does not cast doubt on the scientifically established age of our planet. Persistent disagreement does not undermine objective truth. Likewise, ethical disagreement does not imply ethical relativism. Ethical realism is also not a claim of personal authority. It does not say some people simply know better, but that there are non-arbitrary justification standards, independent of opinion, and accessible to all rational people to be discovered. And this brings us to the core of the framework, starting with the first pillar, metaphorically represented by the naked human leg of the Colossus, human vulnerability. It is an inescapable empirical fact about biology that we can be broken, traumatized, and killed. Because we are vulnerable, any society that allows unchecked dominance and arbitrary violence will inevitably collapse into chaos and destruction. Therefore, protecting this vulnerability is not an optional preference, it is a functional necessity for human coexistence. From this follows the natural rights constraint. We see this architecture clearly when we look at modern human rights tradition. It is not a collection of abstract philosophical concepts. It is an empirical, ethical, legal practice. Historical declarations of rights are the concrete monuments built upon these pillars. The second pillar, the steel man leg of the Colossus, is our nature as reason-giving agents. Humans do not merely react to brute force. We demand justifications. If you restrict my freedom, you owe me a non-arbitrary reason. This is an inescapable feature of human interaction. A state or an individual cannot claim legitimacy through raw violence alone. True legitimacy can only be found in reasons that survive rational, reciprocal scrutiny. From this follows the justification constraint. In a perfect world, these 2 pillars would guide us in proper conflict management, and there would be no need for violent conflicts. Unfortunately, in reality, coercion is a permanent background condition of social life, and ethical principles require institutional enforcement. This leads to the necessity of a coercive authority, a state, a violence monopoly. However, this authority is only legitimate under strict constraints: protection of rights from Pillar 1 and justification constraints from Pillar 2. This creates what can be called a Leviathan constraint. The state is justified only insofar as it prevents domination and forces non-arbitrary rules, rather than becoming a source of arbitrary domination itself. Human rights are the structural realization that the state's monopoly of violence our Leviathan, is only legitimate as long as it operates within the strict boundaries of protecting human vulnerability and upholding rational justification. Let's put this framework to the use. This realism is a sharp ethical compass. 3 examples. Take torture. Cognitive science thoroughly debunks it. Torture does not extract truth. Under extreme trauma, human agents will confess to absolutely anything, just to end the agony. It is a complete breakdown of rational justification and purely arbitrary cruelty. Take the death penalty. Psychology and forensics prove that human justice is prone to error, because wrongful convictions are a documented reality, and forcing an irreversible lethal punishment is inherently irrational and violates the state's duty to protect our individual and collective vulnerability. This same empirical compass completely dismantles cultural relativism, our 3rd example. When critics claim that equal protection for marginalized groups is just a modern Western political trend, science exposes the fallacy. Biology, neuroscience, and anthropology prove that all human beings, regardless of sex, gender, orientation, or heritage, share the exact same fundamental vulnerability and the exact same capacity for reason. Therefore, denying any group equal rights is not a cultural difference. It is an act of arbitrary harm that fails rational scrutiny. By grounding these practical applications in empirical facts and scientific observations, rather than metaphysical dogmas, this framework naturally bridges into the next crucial step: its capacity for constant review, adjustment, and progress. Because this framework is grounded in empirical facts and social sciences, rather than unchanging religious dogmas, it is inherently dynamic. It is open to improvement and revision. If neuroscience or anthropology discover new truths about human nature and reasoning tomorrow, our ethical operating system can adjust. We do not claim an unchangeable cosmic revelation. We claim a scientific, verifiable ethics framework that grows as our understanding of human nature progresses. Let's look at the first classical objections. First, Hume's is-ought gap. The critic claims you cannot derive a value from a fact. Our response is clear. Constitutive facts about rational social agents inherently carry normative implications. The objection only works if you falsely assume that normativity is completely external to human nature. Second, Moore's open question argument. The critic asks, but is it really good? This objection only proves that ethical conclusions require solid justification. It does not prove that such justification is impossible. Simply repeating, but is it good, does not refute our argument. The burden remains on the critic to explain why our derivation fails. Moving on to the next 2 classical objections. Third is the naturalistic fallacy. Critics assume nature is ethically irrelevant. We reject that. While arbitrary facts, like having kidneys, are irrelevant, the constitutive facts of being rational, vulnerable, and reason-giving are fundamentally relevant. If these facts are correctly identified, ethical obligations naturally follow. The dispute is simply whether our derivation is sound. Fourth, evolutionary debunking. These critics say morality is just an evolutionary survival trick, not truth. Our response? Evolution explains how we got our brains and capacities, but it does not invalidate the rational conclusions we reach with them. If evolution invalidated moral truth, it would destroy the validity of science and human reason themselves. Now, let's evaluate our rival moral theories and their shortcomings. First are the group of reductionist accounts, like subjectivism, emotivism, or Hobbesian instrumentalism. They try to reduce ethics to internal emotions or strategic survival. While they can explain what people want or do, they fail to explain why reasons are binding, why justification overrules personal preference, and why moral disagreement is deeper than just a difference in taste. Normativity collapses into mere psychology. Second, eliminativist accounts, or error theory. They claim no moral facts exist at all. But to make that claim, they must rely on logic, reasoning, and standard critique. They are actively denying normativity while completely presupposing it. It is a textbook performative contradiction. They attempt a rational critique while stripping themselves of all normative authority. Let's look at the remaining two rival approaches. The third are aggregative accounts, like utilitarianism. They try to define ethics by maximizing collective welfare. The fatal failure is they cannot secure individual human rights. They permit sacrificing an individual for the group benefit. People become mere numbers in an optimization function, violating the rule that justification must be addressed to each affected agent, not just the collective outcome. And finally, the fourth, procedural accounts, like legal positivism or majoritarianism. They claim a law is valid simply because it followed the proper process or majority will. But procedures only generate decisions, not moral legitimacy. History repeatedly proves that legality and legitimacy diverge, as seen in slavery, colonialism, segregation, just to name a few. Even the legal positivist Gustav Radbruch, after witnessing the horrendous Nazi regime, famously stated that extremely unjust laws ceases to be law. Procedural accounts ultimately require deeper, substantive standards of justice that a procedure alone can never generate. To sum it all up, here is our unified diagnosis. All rival frameworks fail because they try to ground ethics in psychology, elimination, aggregation, or mere procedure. None of them address what is truly essential, the constitutive conditions of rational, vulnerable, reason-giving agents who demand non-arbitrary justification. In contrast, secular natural rights realism anchors ethics firmly in rational agency, human vulnerability, and our social interdependence. From this empirical foundation, a clear logical chain follows. The need for non-arbitrary justification creates rights, which create absolute constraints on domination, setting a permanent limit on majoritarian or strategic override. Sounds complicated, but all it really means is ethics is more important than someone's opinion, a majority vote, or pure imposition. That's all from the main part. Thank you for your time and attention.